When they humiliated Michael, those rich people thought they were filming the world's most entertaining video. But when the Medal of Honor appeared, their video became the greatest shame of their lives. But let's go back to the beginning. Michael Thompson sat on the same park bench every morning at 7 a.m., watching the world of Beverly Hills wake up around him. At 34 years old, he looked older, weathered skin, graying temples, and eyes that had seen too much. His clothes were clean, but worn, donated from various shelters across Los Angeles. A small military-issued duffel bag contained everything he owned in the world. To the joggers, dog walkers, and coffee-sipping residents of this affluent neighborhood, Michael was invisible. Just another homeless veteran that the city hadn't quite figured out how to handle. They would cross the street to avoid him, look through him as if he were made of glass, or occasionally drop $1 in the coffee cup he kept beside him. Not because he was begging, but because people assumed that's what homeless people did. Michael had been living this way for 8 months now. After his discharge from the Army, the transition to civilian life had been brutal. PTSD, survivor's guilt, and a medical system that moved too slowly had left him falling through cracks he didn't even know existed. The small disability check he received wasn't enough for Los Angeles rent, and his family back in Ohio had grown tired of his nightmares and sudden angry outbursts. So he'd ended up here, in Beverly Hills, because it was safer than Skid Row, and the police were generally more professional. Every morning he'd sit on this bench and remember what it felt like to have purpose, to be part of something larger than himself, to matter. What none of the passing strangers knew was that Michael Thompson had once been Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson, 75th Ranger Regiment, and the recipient of the highest military decoration the United States could bestow. Hidden in the depths of his duffel bag, wrapped in a flag that had draped his best friend's coffin, was a Medal of Honor that most people would never be worthy to touch. Thursday morning brought an unusual disturbance to Michael's quiet routine. A group of young people in expensive clothes had gathered near the fountain, about 50 feet from his bench. There were 5 of them, 3 young men in designer streetwear, and 2 young women with perfectly styled hair and makeup that probably cost more than Michael's monthly disability check. The apparent leader was Preston Blake, 23 years old, whose father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. Preston had 2.3 million followers on TikTok and Instagram, where he posted content about luxury lifestyle and motivational success. His signature move was creating viral videos that showcased the dramatic difference between winners and losers in society. Beside him stood Marcus Chen, whose tech entrepreneur parents had bought him a Tesla for his 16th birthday, and Tyler Rodriguez, whose mother was a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon. The 2 young women, Brittany and Madison, were aspiring influencers themselves, hoping that associating with Preston would boost their own social media presence. Preston had built his online brand around the concept of motivation through contrast. He would film himself living luxuriously, then cut to footage of people he deemed unsuccessful, explaining to his millions of followers how mindset and hustle separated winners from losers. His most viral video had been filmed outside a homeless shelter, where he'd lectured about personal responsibility while eating a $200 dinner in his Lamborghini. "Guys, I have an idea for today's content," Preston announced, checking his phone. "See that homeless guy over there? Perfect example of someone who gave up on life. We can create some really powerful motivational content around the difference between his mindset and ours." Brittany giggled. "Preston, you're so smart. This is going to be amazing content." Tyler was already pulling out his phone. "I'll film from this angle. Marcus, you get close-ups of his reaction." None of them had ever spoken to a homeless person before. To them, Michael wasn't a human being with a story, experiences, or dignity. He was a prop for their content, a living example of failure that would make their success look even more impressive by comparison. Preston straightened his $300 hoodie and walked toward Michael's bench with the confidence that comes from never having faced real consequences. His friends followed, phones already recording. In Preston's mind, this was going to be another viral hit. Rich, successful young people showing the world what happens when you don't have the right mindset. "Excuse me, sir," Preston said loudly, making sure his voice would carry clearly on the recording. "I'm Preston Blake, and I have a question for you." Michael looked up slowly. He'd learned not to make sudden movements around civilians. It made them nervous, and nervous people call police. "Yes?" "So, I'm curious," Preston continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "What series of bad decisions led you to this point in your life? Because I'm trying to understand the mindset that results in—" He gestured dismissively at Michael's appearance. "This." The cameras were rolling. Brittany was live streaming to her Instagram story. Marcus was getting multiple angles. This was going to be content gold. A young, successful entrepreneur teaching his followers about the difference between winning and losing mentalities. Michael remained quiet, studying the faces around him. He recognized the look in their eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in the eyes of Taliban fighters, right before they realized they'd made a terrible mistake. Not fear, not yet, but the arrogance that comes right before reality hits. "I mean," Preston continued, warming up to his performance, "look at us. We're your age, maybe younger, but we're successful. We drive nice cars, wear nice clothes, have millions of followers. What's the difference? What choices did you make that led you to sitting on this bench instead of building an empire?" Tyler snickered behind his phone. "This is going to get so many views." Preston pulled out his wallet, a $500 Gucci piece, and made a show of counting the cash inside. "I've got more money in my wallet right now than you've probably seen in months, and you know why? Mindset. I chose success. You chose—" He paused for dramatic effect. "Whatever this is." Michael's jaw tightened slightly. In Afghanistan, he'd seen what real poverty looked like. He'd held dying children whose families would have considered this bench a luxury. But these kids didn't know anything about real suffering. They thought poverty was a choice, homelessness was a character flaw, and their trust funds were proof of their superiority. "You know what the sad part is?" Preston continued, now fully performing for his audience. "You probably blame everyone else for your problems. The government, society, bad luck. But the truth is, successful people take responsibility. We don't make excuses." What happened next would be replayed millions of times on social media, but not in the way Preston expected. Emboldened by his friends' laughter and the growing number of live viewers, Preston decided to push further. "Actually, you know what? I'm feeling generous today. I'm going to give you a chance to change your life." Preston held up a $20 bill. "I'll give you this money, but first, I want you to admit that your situation is your own fault. Say, 'I am homeless because I made bad choices and I take full responsibility.'" The group erupted in laughter. Brittany was practically bouncing with excitement at the drama unfolding on her live stream. The viewer count was climbing rapidly. 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 people watching this humiliation unfold in real time. "Come on," Preston taunted. $20 for just admitting the truth. That's probably more than you make in a week sitting here. All you have to do is take responsibility for your failures." Michael looked at the $20 bill, then at the phones recording him, then at the faces of these young people who thought they were teaching the world a lesson about success and failure. Something inside him shifted, not anger, but a deep, quiet disappointment in what his country had become while he was overseas fighting for it. "You really want to know about choices and responsibility?" Michael asked quietly. Preston grinned. This was it. The moment when the homeless man would either grovel for the money or get angry and prove Preston's point about the victim mentality. Either way, it would be great content. "Absolutely," Preston said. "Tell my followers about the choices that led you here." Michael stood up slowly. Even after months of poor nutrition and stress, he still moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent years in elite military training. He was taller than any of them had expected, and something in his posture made the laughter die away. "The choice I made," Michael said, his voice steady and clear, was to volunteer for 3 combat tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment. The choice I made was to carry wounded soldiers through enemy fire. The choice I made was to put my body between Taliban bullets and American kids who were barely 18 years old. The phones kept recording, but the mood had shifted. Preston's confident smirk was beginning to waver. The choice I made, Michael continued, was to stay behind when my team was evacuating a village, to make sure every single civilian got out alive. And the choice I made was to hold my position for 6 hours against overwhelming enemy forces, knowing I probably wouldn't make it home. Michael reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a small, worn wooden box. His movements were deliberate, respectful, as if he were handling something sacred. The group of influencers had gone completely quiet. Even their live stream viewers seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. The choice I made, Michael said, opening the box, was to accept this medal on behalf of the 8 men from my unit who didn't make it home. Men who died because they chose to run toward gunfire instead of away from it. Men who chose to put strangers' lives before their own comfort. Inside the box, nestled in blue velvet, was the Medal of Honor. The gold star caught the morning sunlight, and even these privileged kids who had never served a day in their lives could recognize the weight of what they were looking at. The Medal of Honor is not just a piece of metal. It's the highest decoration the United States military can bestow, reserved for acts of valor that go beyond the call of duty, beyond what any human being should be expected to do for their country. Fewer than 3,500 have been awarded since the Civil War. The men and women who receive it are invited to the White House, have their names engraved in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, and receive a lifetime pension from a grateful nation. Preston's phone was shaking in his hand. The $20 bill had fallen to the ground. Brittany had stopped her live stream, but not before 50,000 people had witnessed what was about to become the most shared video on social media that week. This medal, Michael continued, was awarded to me by the President of the United States for actions taken during the Battle of Shikin, Afghanistan on September 15, 2019. My team was escorting a convoy of medical supplies to a remote village when we were ambushed by approximately 150 Taliban fighters. We were outnumbered 5-1. Michael's voice remained steady, but his eyes had gone somewhere else, back to that dust-covered valley where good men had died for people they'd never met. When my commanding officer was killed in the first 30 seconds of the firefight, I took command. When our radio operator was hit, I called in our position. When our medic was wounded, I treated casualties while returning fire. And when the order came to evacuate, I volunteered to stay behind and hold the rear guard. The influencers stood frozen, their expensive cameras still recording what was now the most important footage of their lives. For 6 hours I held that position alone, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because there were civilians in that village, children, grandparents, families who had done nothing wrong except be born in a place where wars are fought. The Taliban wanted to overrun that village and execute anyone who had cooperated with American forces. Michael carefully lifted the Medal of Honor from its box. Even Preston, for all his privilege and arrogance, found himself taking an unconscious step backward in respect. When the rescue helicopters finally reached me, I had taken shrapnel in both legs, a bullet through my shoulder, and I was down to my last magazine of ammunition. But every single civilian in that village was alive. Every member of my team who could be evacuated had made it to safety, and the medical supplies we were escorting reached the village clinic where they were used to treat children with diseases that could have been prevented if they'd been born somewhere else. The morning of September 15, 2019 had started like any other patrol for Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson and his 12-man Ranger team. They were escorting a convoy of medical supplies to the Shikin Valley, a route they'd traveled dozens of times before. Intelligence reports had indicated light Taliban activity in the area, but nothing that a squad of Rangers couldn't handle. Michael had been in Afghanistan for 14 months on his 3rd deployment. At 28 years old, he was one of the senior non-commissioned officers in his unit, responsible for training younger soldiers and ensuring mission success. His men trusted him completely. He'd never lost a soldier under his command, and he had a reputation for making the right decisions under pressure. The ambush came at 0847 hours, just as the convoy was approaching the village of Marga. The Taliban had positioned fighters on both sides of the narrow mountain road, creating a deadly crossfire that immediately disabled the lead vehicle and trapped the convoy in a kill zone. Captain Williams, the team leader, was hit by sniper fire in the first volley. Sergeant Rodriguez, the radio operator, went down seconds later when an RPG exploded near his position. In the span of 30 seconds, Michael found himself in command of a unit that was taking heavy casualties with no immediate prospect of reinforcement. The decision Michael made in that moment would define the rest of his life. Instead of calling for immediate evacuation, he assessed the tactical situation and realized that the Taliban's ultimate objective wasn't just to destroy the convoy. They wanted to overrun the village and punish the civilians who had been cooperating with American medical personnel. Michael ordered his remaining 10 soldiers to establish a defensive perimeter while he called in their position to headquarters. The nearest reinforcements were at least 4 hours away. The village contained approximately 200 civilians, including children and elderly people who would be unable to escape if the Taliban break through their lines. When the order came from headquarters to execute a fighting withdrawal and wait for helicopter extraction, Michael made the choice that would earn him the Medal of Honor. He ordered his men to evacuate with the wounded, while he remained behind to hold the defensive position and buy time for the civilians to reach safety. For 6 hours, Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson fought alone against overwhelming odds. He used every tactic he'd learned in Ranger School, every lesson from previous deployments, every bit of strength and courage he possessed. He moved constantly to avoid being pinned down, used captured Taliban weapons when his ammunition ran low, and called in danger-close airstrikes that landed within 50 meters of his own position. When the rescue helicopters finally reached him, they found Michael unconscious from blood loss, surrounded by evidence of one of the most heroic stands in modern military history. The village of Marga was intact. Every civilian had survived, and the medical supplies that the convoy had been carrying were distributed to the village clinic, where they saved dozens of lives in the months that followed. The Medal of Honor citation would later read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as team leader with Company C, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment." What happened next moved faster than anyone could have anticipated. Brittany's live stream had been automatically saved to her Instagram account, capturing every moment from Preston's initial taunts to Michael's revelation of the Medal of Honor. Tyler and Marcus had recorded the entire encounter from multiple angles, and in their shock, they'd forgotten to stop filming. Within hours, the video was everywhere. It had been screen recorded by dozens of viewers and shared across every social media platform. The hashtag Medal of Honor Veteran began trending on Twitter. News outlets picked up the story. Military veterans organizations shared it with messages of support for Michael and condemnation for the influencer's behavior. But the real damage to Preston and his friends was just beginning. Internet users are remarkably skilled at identifying people in viral videos, and within 24 hours, all 5 influencers had been doxxed. Their full names, social media accounts, and family information were circulating online, along with their addresses and their parents' businesses. Preston Blake discovered that 2.3 million followers can disappear as quickly as they arrived. His Instagram account lost over 500,000 followers in the first day. Brands that had sponsored his content began canceling contracts. His father's car dealerships were flooded with negative reviews and calls for boycotts. More devastating than the financial consequences was the social humiliation. The video of Preston offering $20 to a Medal of Honor recipient had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms. Late-night talk show hosts were mocking him. Military families were organizing protests outside his father's businesses. The video had become a symbol of everything wrong with influencer culture and the disconnect between privileged youth and the sacrifices made by America's veterans. Tyler Rodriguez's mother, the plastic surgeon, issued a public apology and announced that her family would be donating $100,000 to veterans' charities. Marcus Chen's parents temporarily closed their business due to threats and protests. Brittany and Madison found themselves unemployable as influencers, their reputations permanently destroyed by their association with the incident. The response from the veteran community was swift and overwhelming. Michael's identity had been confirmed through military records, and his Medal of Honor citation was republished in news articles around the country. GoFundMe pages raised over $2 million for his housing and medical care. Military families invited him into their homes. Veterans organizations offered him employment and support services. A retired Army colonel named Patricia Hayes, who ran a Veterans Assistance Program in Los Angeles, reached out to Michael within 48 hours of the video going viral. She offered him temporary housing, mental health counseling, and help navigating the VA system to get the benefits he deserved. "What those kids did to you was despicable," Colonel Hayes told Michael when they first met, "but maybe some good can come out of it. Your story is helping people understand what our veterans go through when they come home." The city of Beverly Hills, embarrassed by the negative attention the incident had brought to their community, allocated $5 million to expand homeless services, particularly for veterans. The mayor personally apologized to Michael and offered him a job with the city's Veterans Outreach Program. Most importantly, Michael began receiving the medical and psychological care he'd needed since returning from Afghanistan. The VA fast-tracked his disability claim, acknowledging that his PTSD and physical injuries from his Medal of Honor action entitled him to full benefits and priority housing. 6 months after the viral video incident, Michael Thompson stood at a podium in the Beverly Hills City Council chambers, addressing a room full of local officials, veterans advocates, and community members. He was wearing a donated suit, his hair was neatly cut, and he was living in a small apartment provided by the Veterans Housing Program. "When those young people approached me that day," Michael began, "I was angry. Not because they were wealthy and I was homeless, but because they represented everything I thought I had fought against. The idea that a person's worth is determined by their material possessions rather than their character and actions." The audience listened in respectful silence. Many of them had seen the viral video, and Michael's transformation from homeless veteran to community advocate had been covered extensively in local media. "But I've learned something over these past months," Michael continued. "Those kids weren't evil. They were ignorant. They had never been taught to see beyond surface appearances, to understand that every person has a story, that everyone deserves dignity, regardless of their circumstances." Michael's new role with the Veterans Outreach Program had put him in contact with dozens of homeless veterans throughout Los Angeles. He'd learned that his experience was far from unique. Thousands of combat veterans were struggling with homelessness, PTSD, and inadequate support systems. "The real tragedy isn't that those young people humiliated me," Michael said. "The real tragedy is that there are thousands of veterans in this city who have served their country with honor, who have made sacrifices for freedom and democracy, and who are sleeping on streets and park benches because we as a society have failed to take care of them." Michael announced the launch of the Medal of Honor Veterans Initiative, a program funded by donations that had poured in after his story went viral. The program would provide immediate housing assistance, mental health counseling, and job training for homeless veterans throughout Southern California. "I didn't ask to become famous," Michael concluded, "but if my humiliation can prevent other veterans from experiencing what I went through, if it can open people's eyes to the struggles our military families face, then maybe some good will come from all of this." Preston Blake never fully recovered from the viral video incident. His influencer career was over, his brand partnerships canceled, and his social media accounts remained virtually inactive. 6 months after the incident, he enrolled in community college to study social work, stating in a rare interview that he wanted to understand people's real struggles instead of exploiting them for content. Tyler Rodriguez and Marcus Chen both issued public apologies and began volunteering with veterans organizations. Tyler's mother's medical practice started offering free cosmetic surgery to veterans with facial injuries from combat, while Marcus used his family's tech connections to develop a mobile app connecting homeless veterans with social services. Brittany and Madison largely disappeared from social media, both reportedly pursuing traditional careers away from the influencer economy. Neither granted interviews about the incident, but sources close to them indicated that the experience had fundamentally changed their perspectives on privilege and responsibility. The viral video became a case study in business schools and communications programs, examining how quickly online fame can turn into infamy and the importance of understanding social responsibility in the digital age. 2 years after the viral video incident, Michael Thompson was featured on the cover of Time magazine as one of their Heroes of the Year. The Medal of Honor Veterans Initiative had helped over 1,500 homeless veterans find housing and employment. Michael had spoken at schools, community centers, and corporate events about the invisible struggles of military families and the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances. The park bench where Michael used to sit homeless was now marked with a small plaque, in honor of all veterans who have served with valor and returned home to new battles. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. Michael kept the viral video bookmarked on his phone, not as a reminder of his humiliation, but as proof of how quickly things can change when people are willing to listen, learn, and act with compassion. The same social media platforms that had spread his humiliation had also spread awareness about veterans' issues and generated millions of dollars in support for military families. "I don't blame those kids anymore," Michael reflected in a recent interview. "They gave me something I hadn't had in years, a purpose beyond my own survival." Sometimes, the worst moments in our lives become the foundation for the best things we ever do. In his apartment, Michael kept 2 items on his dresser: the Medal of Honor that had changed his life twice, once when he earned it in Afghanistan, and once when he revealed it in Beverly Hills, and a framed photo of the 8 Rangers who didn't make it home from that valley in Afghanistan. Every morning he would look at both items and remember that honor isn't about recognition or reward. It's about choosing to do the right thing, even when nobody's watching, even when you get nothing in return, even when the people you're protecting will never know your name. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the right choice becomes the foundation for something larger than yourself. The end. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about honor, sacrifice, and the hidden heroes among us. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever judged someone before knowing their story?